Croissant, this is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. Just one book in this video, and it is Sharon Penman's When Christ and His Saints Slept. Now, I finished this a couple of months ago. I've only just gotten around to making the video, time and all that. I'm going to give a quick summary of the historical context, but I'll be fairly brief. It takes place shortly after the death of King Henry I of England. He's not left a male heir. He has named his daughter as his heir, but she's one, a woman, and two, very unpopular among the nobility, so they ignore her claim, and instead they put in place her cousin Stephen, Stephen of either Blois or Bois. I'm afraid I don't pronounce French names well, I do apologise. But he gets put in place instead of her, and this kicks off a long civil war which becomes known as the Anarchy. And during this time, the name does sum it up quite well. England descends into chaos. You have lords acting essentially as brigands, taking advantage of the fact that there's no strong central leadership anymore. You have an invasion of mercenaries coming in because both sides are using Flemish mercenaries and mercenaries from Brittany and things like that. And it's why a contemporary monk writes down, "It was as though Christ and his saints slept," because it was a truly horrific time for England. Now, the book starts with, it's just before this succession, and William the Etheling, who would have been a king, dies in the tragedy of the White Ship, and Maud is thinking she's going to be queen, and then Stephen, who she thought she could trust, whips it out from under her, and everything kicks off. It carries on through covering pretty much all of that war until, historical spoiler alert, we have Henry II becoming king. Now, I've written down my pros and cons. I'm going to get the cons out of the way. There are a few of them. It was a difficult book to like. I did like it. I'm glad I read it, and it wasn't a bad book. And it had enough good in it that I will call it a good book. But I'm in no rush to reread it. It was hard going. And the first reason for that is because it is huge. Now, I like big books. I write big books. But there's so much material to cover, and a lot of it is crammed in so tightly that this should have been 2, maybe 3 books. It's as if the author liked this period in history, but really wanted to get to Henry and Eleanor at the end. And so, yeah, it felt both rushed and sometimes padded at the same time. I think it could have done with a bit of chop and change, a bit of tidying up, and definitely was being split. Another problem with it was there were too many point of view characters, some of which were completely unnecessary. Now, of course, multiple POV, that's fine, I'm more than happy with that. But we had POV characters in this who are sort of fire and forget. We have a prostitute in here who we have a long backstory for, and we have a long thing about her motivations and her life and her dreams and all that. She interacts with the principal character, and then she's gone. Don't see her again. And she was only there to give us a bit of a perspective on that principal. You think, hang on, we've had 20 pages of this person only to have this perspective on the principal. That could have been done a lot quicker and easier. And we have it with one of Geoffrey of Anjou's lovers. Yes, he's a bit of a rogue, and it's good to see someone who's fond of him, but again, we have all this backstory for them, all this motivation for them. They interact with him, and then we never see him again. We didn't need it. It made a very long book even longer, and a lot of this, at least, needs to be in here for the story. That didn't. So that's a definite con in my book. And this is a personal preference, in a lot of them you have head swapping within chapters, which I don't really like. I like to have a clear barrier between whose head we're in at the time, because it gives you a better feel for how they are viewing the world. It's a personal thing, but it did limit my enjoyment. And my final sort of a con, I didn't like the invented principal who is there to sort of tell the story from all angles. Much like Richard Sharp, who's a fictional character, and he's fictional because it means he can be in all these vital places. Ranulph is a fictional character, and it means he can be everywhere he needs to be so that the story can be told, a lot of it at least, from his perspective. I didn't like him much. He was alright, but I didn't really connect with him, not until quite late on when he comes to Wales. And by then, you need to be invested in a bit earlier on. So yeah, that's the cons, at least. But for all the difficulty in this book, there are a lot of pros. I amuse myself. There are a lot of positive points. The actual principles, the historical principles, I did find very engaging and very well written. Empress Maud and King Stephen are both people who suffer from being very generalized in history. People think of Maud and they think, well, she was this arrogant, insufferable woman who nobody wanted to be on the throne unless there was something in it for them. And Stephen, they say, he was a nice enough guy, but he was kind of useless, never should have been put in that position. And while those aren't inaccurate ideas of them, they are very two-dimensional. And this added a third dimension. Yes, Maud is very arrogant and very difficult to get along with, but you see why she is that way. And you see she does have a softer side, but she's had to toughen up in this man's world. Stephen, he's sort of a man out of his time. He's a naturally merciful and forgiving and kindly person. And that doesn't make for good kingship in time of war in the Middle Ages. It's sad, but it's true. He was sort of too decent a man for the job he was in. And so that was interesting. I liked that. I liked Geoffrey of Anjou, who again is generally treated quite two-dimensionally as this man-slut who just liked having wars and sleeping around. And yes, he definitely did that, and he definitely wasn't a good husband to Maud. But it does show him as a positive father figure to Henry, and as someone who wasn't entirely self-serving, who did care about his legacy. And I liked that. And especially, and I think that the author liked them as well, I did love Henry and Eleanor. Henry II, Henry Plantagenet, Henry Curthose, Kurt Mantle, he is one of my favourite characters in history. I saw The Lion in Winter at a formative age, and him being played by Peter O'Toole in that and in Beckett. So I love that historical character, it's fascinating. And I loved how they developed him in this. Keep saying they, she is Sharon Penn. I love how he was developed. They have him right from when he's a small child, and they have him as the academic that he was, they have him as the bit of a rogue that he was, they have him as the capable soldier that he was and the cunning diplomat that he was. And even though he's very young, you see all that potential in him, and you see it through his perspective and through Eleanor's perspective, who there's an age gap, and she's also seeing this potential in him, not just as a handsome man to marry for his daring nature and for his position, but also for what he may achieve in the future, and I liked that. And I liked Eleanor. They gave her some good fleshing out. Eleanor of Aquitaine, another fascinating historical character, who really was done a lot of justice in this. So, from those perspectives, it really worked. I really liked Robert of Gloucester, smaller historical figure to most people's minds, but a big deal in his time, a big reason why Maud did as well as she did in the early years. A nice counterpart to Maud in that she won't be crowned because she's a woman, he can't be crowned because he's illegitimate. But both of them would have made competent rulers. He would probably be the best of her and Stephen and Robert. I did enjoy, again, I'm sneakily looking at my notes here, I did enjoy the tragedy of the anarchy is made very, very clear. The bandit lords, the suffering of the common people, even though it's mostly 90% nobility POV, the suffering of the common people in this war is made very clear, and I liked that a lot. So even though there's a lot of things in the con column the pro column is really very high. So even though this was a very long book and it had a lot of flaws in it, this was really good. And I'm in no rush to reread it because it's hard work, but the end result was worth the effort. So yes, if you're interested in early medieval history, especially in the beginnings of the Plantagenet dynasty, I would recommend you read this. Set aside some time for it. Be prepared to do it in chunks and be prepared for some of it being a bit of a slog. But overall, this is really very good. A great depiction of some great historical characters. So yes, I'm going to leave that as a recommendation for this. When Christ and His Saints Slept by Sharon Penman. Give this a go. If you're a history fan, I think you will enjoy it. Good characters, good history. I'm going to leave it there. This is James, aka JP Harker. Well out.